Hey, what's going on? Jeff Lerner here, and we are talking about, are you rich or poor in the head? Basically, we're going to talk about the mindset that differentiates, thinking about the world as a rich person, thinking about the world as a poor person. This might be controversial. This might upset some people. That's not necessarily the intent, but I do think it's an acceptable byproduct of speaking my truth is how I see the world. So if you're down with that, let's do it. Okay, so are you rich or poor in the head? Let me explain that statement before people get too worked up about it. There's a statement that I'm pretty fond of that basically says that broke is a temperature, poor is a thermostat setting. So if you think about a thermostat, right? A thermostat says, hey, when something, basically control the environment, manipulate the conditions to keep things at a certain temperature. So when I talk about being poor, I'm not actually talking about the size of your bank account. I'm really talking about a certain perspective, a certain belief system about the world, where naturally you'll tend to stay at a certain level and or believe that it's appropriate to be at a certain level. Now you can be broke, and like I said, broke is a temperature. But if the thermostat is set here and the temperature goes here, the thermostat is gonna work and work and work. It's gonna blast the AC or it's gonna blast the heat until the temperature adjusts. So if you're broke, but you're fighting like crazy to change your circumstances, you're not poor. You're just temporarily out of money. But if you're poor, frankly, you could find yourself with a lot of money, but over time you're gonna regress back to the thermostat setting. You see the difference? So, a lot of people they kind of resist this categorization of how the world works. But here's what I would suggest is instead of getting angry at the characterization and acting like, you're being blamed or victimized or that's not fair or different. Look, we all get it. People have different starting points. But ultimately, and this comes from real psychology, by the way. This isn't just like one guy's opinion. The fact is, learned optimism, it's a whole school of study, positive psychology by Martin Seligman, basically talks about the pragmatism, the practical value of optimism and how the set of beliefs and the set of stories that you tell yourself about the world ultimately are the extent to which you have control over your world. And so in choosing the stories that you're going to tell, in choosing the beliefs that you're going to invest in, choose the ones that are going to have the best practical outcome for your own life. Like be self-interested, choose the belief system, choose the narrative that's going to result in the best quality of life for you, regardless of where you started or regardless of what your initial handicaps were. And so the fact is, choosing to believe what I'm saying, which is that poor is a thermostat setting, broke is just a temperature, and that if you find yourself out of money, view it as an aberrance to where the thermostat is set and do the work to get back to where you tell yourself you belong, that's going to result in a better practical outcome for your life than buying into the belief system that says, oh, well, it's not my fault, I can't help it. Now, that's not to say causality. I'm not saying what's the true, etiology of poverty in one person's specific situation. I'm simply talking about the practical value of what you choose to believe and how you choose to be in the world. This is a very practically beneficial perspective, is the idea that rich and poor are states of mind that happen in the head and that you can change your thermostat setting to ultimately create sort of a gravity that pulls you to a different financial situation. I came by this belief system pretty fairly, pretty authentically. I grew up around people who had a lot of money, so I tended to have a belief that having a lot of money was possible. I recognized that that's been a big part of my success, but there were long periods of my life as an adult when I did not have a lot of money. I spent most of my 20s as a relatively broke, I won't say poor, relatively broke jazz musician for about a decade, never made more than $40,000 in a year. And that was working, 8 to 10 gigs a week and teaching 20 or 30 hours of piano lessons a week and going to school. I mean, I was all told I was probably working 80 to 100 hours a week just to make 42 grand, I think is the most money I made during that 10-year stretch. But I had a moment when I was 28 years old when I really kind of bottomed out financially. I had taken my savings at the time, which I had scraped together by living, as a single musician, and invested in starting a franchise restaurant. I was able to get a small business administration loan, and I lost everything. My actual balance sheet at the time was that I had $13,000 in cash that I had been able to pull out of my business before it failed completely and went out of business. But I had, I think it was $502,000 in debt on paper. So my liabilities were $500,000 and I had $13,000 in cash. So I couldn't even go put that cash in the bank because all my bank accounts were frozen. I couldn't open new bank accounts because my current bank accounts were overdrawn, and so there was a flag on my name. Banks wouldn't even let me open a new account. And the banks where I did have accounts, I also had past due loans. So if I had put the money into my accounts, they would have seized the funds. So I literally had $13,000 that I couldn't even put into a bank because of the crushing weight of $500,000 in debt and a financial system that was basically locked against me. And because these were federally guaranteed Small Business Administration loans, I wasn't just in arrears with a bank, I was in arrears with the federal government. I had the US Treasury trying to track me down and chase me and get money from me. So it was a really, really hard situation. And it was frankly, it would have been a very easy situation for me to decide I'm poor, which essentially is synonymous by my definition of saying I'm screwed. Like there's sort of a victim psychology of saying, I'm screwed. And and in that situation, I think I could have made a reasonable case and I probably could have been forgiven for being like, I'm screwed here. Like there's nothing I can do. But I didn't. I was exposed to this idea, thankfully, around the same time, reading books by Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. I was exposed to Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I remember reading some Brian Tracy. I remember listening to some Tony Robbins. Like I was like, no, man, I can't give into this. Like I can't let it break me. I can be broke, but I can't be broken, and I can't be poor. I can't be poor in the mind. So around that time, I was exposed to some training about how to create a business online. And this was 2008. So this was being an internet business owner. This was like pre-ClickFunnels. This was pre-Shopify. This was the early days of Facebook. Like Facebook was still kind of this weird thing that like only college kids did. And so the idea of like, well, I'll just start a business on the internet was not really like a mainstream thing at the time, but I was exposed to some people that seemed very credible and had education around how to do that. And I remember having to make a decision. And I remember saying, if I am who I say I am and who I have claimed to believe that I am, I will go after this opportunity. But if I am a fear-based person, if I accept my situation as appropriate or befitting of me as a person, then I will be scared and I will cling to that $13,000 and I will not invest the money in potentially digging out of my situation, even though I know that a $13,000 knife against, in a $500,000 debt gunfight, so to speak, it's not going to save me anyways, but I will hoard it if I'm playing small. And I knew this at the time. So I actually invested $10,000 of the $13,000 in an online educational program, and I actually sent the money. I had to go convert it into a cashier's check, which I was able to do at a bank. They would let me essentially convert the money into a checking instrument. And I sent it to this company in California that sold this online education business training. So now my $13,000 is $3,000. My debt is still $500,000, but I just drew a line in the sand. I said, I may be broke, but I'm not poor. I will still invest in myself. And frankly, I shudder to think about where my life would be if I hadn't done that, because everything I've accomplished in the last 12 years professionally has been built on the education that I got through that program. Now, whether it was smart or not, or whether I would prescribe that to anyone else, like I can't make a prescription for anybody else's life. But I can tell you in that moment, that was the moment when I said, not only am I not poor, I'll never be poor. I could be so out of money, I could be in the negative. In fact, that year I filed a negative $40,000 tax return. I actually sent my file to the IRS with the number negative $40,000, and I was able to carry it over to the next year when I actually started making some money because of that education. But that was my line in the sand moment when I said, I may be broke, but I'll never be poor. And I want to encourage you that this is real stuff. This sounds kind of like woo-woo metaphysical, but if I do anything with my life at this point, it's stand as a living testimony in very spiritual terms, that this type of belief system, that this is real, that this actually plays out in real life. When you make decisions like that, it's like Tony Robbins says, nothing happens until you make a decision. And then you will naturally start to follow up decisions with actions that validate and support and edify and ultimately build the truth and the reality of that decision. But if you don't start with the decision, and the word decision, if you're not familiar with the root of the word decision, it actually means to cut off. A lot of people think decision is to choose a thing. It's not. It's to cut off other things and take what's left. When you decide something, you cut off the possibilities that are not that thing. So in that moment, I cut off the possibility that I was a poor person. And what was left was an opportunity, a mandate, a necessity to make it work. I had no choice. I think it was Pizarro who burned his boats when he conquered the New World. There was no retreat. That's the kind of thing that you have to do sometimes. Now, there's a book, if you're wanting to convert this concept, if you like the feeling, if you're hearing me talk and you're like, ooh, I like the way that feels, but I want more. I want more tangible, applicable, language that I can apply to my life. I'm going to recommend a book called Secrets of the Millionaire Mind by T. Harv Eker that basically has what he calls wealth files, and there's 17 of them, and they're so powerful. It's things like, rich people play the money game to win, poor people play the money game not to lose. Rich people see, opportunities, poor people see obstacles. Rich people learn and grow, poor people think they already know. I don't remember them all. There's 17 of them. Probably the one that captures them all the most is the first one, which is, rich people believe I create my life, and poor people believe life happens to me. And that's ultimately the fundamental shift. And again, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not an anthropologist, I don't have a bunch of fancy credentials after my name to try to diagnose, say it's not their fault or why people believe what they believe. But I'm talking about the practical reality that if you believe the things that book says rich people believe, and you can quibble about the terms rich and poor and substitute them with, abundance consciousness and poverty consciousness, or whatever words make you feel better and less judgy in processing the language. The truth is the truth. And the fact is, adopting this mindset will move you forward in this world more than adopting the flip side victim mindset. Now, here's the last thing I'm going to say about all this. So I work, since 2008 when I got started in this. It wasn't long after that. Basically once you start making good money in an internet-based business, you get people naturally coming to you like, hey, Jeff, will you coach me, or can I get on a training call, and can you help me out? And you start getting invited to speak and lead training groups and do stuff that kind of puts you in a position to observe a lot of people operating in this space of trying to change their life or saying that they want different things in their life, and then getting to see whether or not their behavior is actually consistent with that statement for their life. And so I have a lot of perspective on how different people operate in terms of trying to create a better place for themselves. And I've defined something that, and this is, again, from my experience of coaching and working with a lot of people, I've kind of come up with this concept that I call OSD. And that stands for Optimism Spectrum Disorder. And so here's the basic concept of OSD, is that think of the spectrum of optimism, right? So over here we have optimism, over here we have pessimism. It's a spectrum, right? This is the person that's probably optimistic to a fault. They think that everything's gonna work out, oh sweet, I just got my bonus, I'm going straight to the convenience store and I'm spending it all on lottery tickets because today's my lucky day and I just know that my shift's gonna come in, right? And this guy, nothing works in this person's life. It's all doomed, it's all fatalistic. I don't know why they even bother getting out of bed in the morning, right? So this is the spectrum of optimism. So really successful, what we're terming rich people, but again, abundance consciousness people, or whatever you want to sort of comfortably call them, I would say inhabit that. I would call these people, we'll use the term rich. Poor people, or poverty consciousness people, or basically people that tend to get consistently sucky results in the world, let's just call it what it is, they tend to be here, but every now and then, if they get caught up in the moment, if somebody tells them exactly what they want to hear, or if it's late in the day and they're tired and they're just a little more susceptible to a promise, for whatever reason, all of a sudden they will like yo-yo, whoo, no, this one's it, this is the one that's going to change my life. And they come way over here to the point where they're so optimistic that they're insane. And then it doesn't work. And then their hopes are dashed. And then whoo, they come back here and boo-hoo, woe is me, like everything's, and there's this above average, but not completely insane level of optimism that is inhabited by consistently successful people that for some reason, some people, again, I'm not a child psychology expert, but there's some people that are like indoctrinated to mostly live here and to occasionally leapfrog sanity over to here and then spring back, and that's their life. Their life is determined. And they grow old with the story of the one time when they got screwed or they got gypped. And here's what happens right here. This is where scam happens. Let's write this out. This scam, so very often, not always, I'm not saying there aren't really crappy people out there that don't do horrible, deceptive things, but very often, this is when this person took this one chance, they were temporarily insane, and they yo-yoed over to an absurd degree of optimism, and it didn't work out. And then they swung back and they spend the rest of their life talking about that time they got scammed. Facts are facts. I've seen it play out hundreds of times. Again, I've trained over 150,000 people. Every outcome you can possibly imagine around people trying to change their financial life, I've seen hundreds of times. I've seen this play out hundreds of times. And it's a reality, but it's not reality. People can choose. Ultimately, you can choose. You can choose to be rich or poor in the head. And think about this concept of optimism, spectrum, disorder, and resist it, however tempting it may be. Okay, hey, that's again, I'm unqualified. I don't have all the credentials after my name, but I do have the singular credential of a lot of experience working with a lot of people. And this is my truth. Take it or leave it. Hey, if you like this stuff, subscribe to my channel. I appreciate you watching. Make sure you click the bell to get notifications when I post more videos. You may not always love what you hear here, but you'll always get exactly what I believe. You'll get my truth. So I appreciate you. I'll catch you in the next video.